let me start with a disclaimer. I'm not here speaking as the chairman of the standing committee. A lot of things there happen in a hodgepodge mix of politics, subjects which is decided to be taken, confidentiality uppermost, and then finally a decision. And we have started proceedings on various issues, including Northeast and on at the moment of the demand for grants, because this is the intercession period between two parts of the same session of Parliament. So demand for grants is going on. So, but I looked at the topic when you told me, and I thought I'll make some 7-8 points, and then more importantly listen to people like Mr. Bhalla, Mr. Ahluwalia, and all the other people on this table who are experts who practice this on a daily basis. I thought that in any case, the focus is of course manifold, and I'll make some 7-8 of those points. But the two things which struck me in the beginning, which I wanted to mention, were that improving export performance in both capital intensive and labor intensive sectors, which includes employment generation as a facet, and facilitating imports of essential inputs or essential items, and minimizing or reducing the import of other non-essentials. And this obviously links to enhancing levels of competitiveness. It links to larger issues like integrating with global value chains, etc. So, on the nitty-gritty, because I do believe, as Thomas Hardy put it, take care of the small things, the big things take care of themselves. On the nitty-gritty, my wish list would be, firstly, this trade deficit issue. Now, I have here a table which somebody worked out for me from 11-12, that is 2011-12 to 21-22. And that has columns of exports and growth in exports for each year for the last decade or so, and imports and growth of imports. And from a simple valuation of merchandise trade, I'm talking of merchandise trade, the trade imbalance has been from minus 183% to 190%, sometimes 137%, and of the last quarter of 22 at 218%. So the growth of imports versus the growth of exports has this negative figure consistently across the last 10 years. I think this needs to be addressed. We certainly want to address it in our committee. I think it's a matter of concern for every citizen. And it will need principally these two things: the promotion of exports and the control of non-essential imports. And of course, domestic encouraging in the this is the shorter term, in the longer term, encouraging manufacturing domestically of those items we rely on, part of the Atmanirbhar concept. But it is not happening for the last 10 years. The simple chart of figures shows that. And that is, I think, should be a cause of worry. A second area of concern is that I find it, and we did address it recently, that in the very same para or breadth that we talk of export promotion, we talk also and we find also a diminution in export incentive schemes. We get representations not only as a parliamentary committee but otherwise from a lot of the industry associations saying that incentive schemes which have proved their worth are being diminished or affected. And that is obviously not a good way of either increasing exports or diminishing non-essential imports. The two mentioned, among others, is the request for enhancement of interest subvention under the interest equalization scheme. People are asking from 2 to 5%. And the market access initiative scheme. Now these have either not got the requisite enhancement or have suffered marginalization. And a lot of people are complaining about it. I think the stakeholders who complain about it need to be given due weight, and I think they are speaking from experience. And since it connects with the chart I have just mentioned, there is a clear hiatus between promise and performance, or between promise and making good that promise. The third area, which I wanted to mention, logistics. I was quite amused to find that Economic Survey itself says that our country has logistics cost at about 14 to 18% of GDP, with a global benchmark of 8%. So there's an arbitrage of 10% or 6%, or it sounds a very remarkably high arbitrage or hiatus. So reduction even by 10% in logistics cost would mean a lot of difference. The same study and other studies have found that this logistics issue navigates a very circuitous maze of more than 20 government agencies, 37 export promotion councils, over 10,000 commodities. And the carriage of goods through various modes involving logistics is governed further by several complex and cumbersome laws. The entire thing is fragmented. And I think that is what leads to this suboptimal performance. This is something which I would like to address in some recommendation. It is partly been addressed, but this is something which the actual governmental departments and ministries should work on. Because an overarching, interdisciplinary, cross-sectoral, single window approach is alone what will solve this problem. Obviously, more nitty-gritty means strategically aligning rail, road, air and shipping networks. Looking at last mile connectivities. You have good connectivity infrastructure, then you have a gap. So those are obvious things. And one aspect here is judicial delays, which is something which we talk about all the time. In the legal side, which is the other hat I wear, there are enough sermons and seminars where this is said. It is not really improved. In fact, to be honest, COVID has made it worse. A fourth area I found was dwell time at airports. World Bank data says that the average time taken for completing documentation and regulatory requirement in air cargo, I'm obviously talking of cargo, not passengers, is 11.6 hours in India, and in 1.5 hours, 1.7 hours in USA and EU. China is more respectively closer to us at 8.6 hours. But the other two are literally 10 times less. Now, a cargo dwell time, which is 10 times less in developed countries, and 10 times more here, obviously has direct impact. And therefore, they say that the cost of completing documentary compliance in our country compared to others is that much more significantly higher. I think with the great initiatives of IT, both in the previous governments and in this government in particular, with all the IT used for last mile delivery, I don't see why this can't be changed. IT is the answer. Simplifying export processes, making them IT enabled and a single window should be able to reduce. Single window is very important. Should be able to create a synergy and reduce these figures which I have in favor of the country. A fifth area is container manufacturing or containers. As I said, I'm being a little nitty-gritty, but I believe, as I said, that take care of the smaller things, the big things take care of themselves. Containers, the hiatus between growth of demand and availability is some 30-40%. Somebody says there's 64% growth in demand and the actual availability is 25% or 30%. Now, dearth in availability of containers is a major bottleneck and a handicap. I mean, one of the Atmanirbhar total focuses should be simply to set up manufacturing of containers. I was horrified to learn, and I'm sure this is correct, I've not had that much time to check up, then roughly 90% of the total world container manufacturing comes from China. That's a remarkable figure. So, one of the Atmanirbhar focuses has to be to substitute that for India. And without that, this hiatus, there is no way in which you can deal with faster, quicker, efficient, cheaper movements without having availability. You will ultimately get the container, but much higher cost, much longer, etc. And the PLI scheme really should be applied in a big way to containers. Turning, of course, to the obvious and a very important sixth area is the FTAs. Now, FTAs, first of all, I find that the manufacturing and the export ecosystem for MSMEs and the integration with the FTA needs is not being done. The MSMEs are the laggards and suffering in this regard. Also, this focus on tailoring the commitments under FTAs, as they say, looking at countries of particular interest to us. I found in the reading jargon, friend assuring, more countries leaning towards us rather than countries not so much, should be a kind of an inbuilt tailoring within the FTA system. We have to select these countries on the basis of goods, services, investments and regulatory issues which complement the global value chain. There has to be that. I think there's a lot of movement in the FTA, but there is not that amount of attention and detail paid to the overall aligning into a global sense with that nationwide interest. Industry associations who complain to us also suggest that dissemination of information regarding standard and certification requirements involved in FTAs is very poor, and they have a huge information gap. We had somebody off staff of my committee pointed out that they are saying that we have a huge information gap, although we are empowered, we are in the business, but we just don't know, because it's a very technical and a constantly changing scenario. Now that again should be very easy to solve. At least clarity and stability, and most importantly not ever changing, should be done, and this is based on actual experience. An interesting thing with the legal aspect I found, which I think we should work on, is intellectual property financing and leveraging. There are persons who are low on asset value, or rather commercial entities low on asset value, but rich on possessing valuable IP assets. And they find they cannot leverage it sufficiently as security, collateral, securitization, collateralization for lending and financing. I think there should be a special focus on using intellectual property assets to enhance collateralization and securitization for financing purposes. I believe, and certainly you are experts, you will know better, that most lenders are wary of using these or allowing these to be used as collateral. If they are doing it in very small numbers. In particular, startups and SMEs who have this asset suffer more because they don't have the traditional collateralization assets which are available to non-SMEs and non-startups in particular. So I think given the great push to startups, the Prime Minister talks about it in a very major way, I think this collateral push or a concomitant push in terms of creating a financing mechanism within our financial ecosystem to recognize these in the first place and then start acting more and more on financing and collateralization, this would be a very useful thing. Pradeep used the word narrative, and I was going to use it in a more abstract sense because I found some interesting thought process on narrative. I think above a lot of the nitty-gritty which we've talked is the importance of changing the narrative, or at least understanding the impact of attempting to change the narrative. The amorphous and the vague and the subjective is sometimes the more important, the qualitative is more important than the quantitative. And you have out there also a debate going on for this reason between the numbers versus the narrative debate. I think the important thing is to find the sweet spot of intersection between the numbers and the narrative. Numbers alone will not get you there. The subjectivity of the ambience and the emotion which gets across as the narrative will. And I'll give you some interesting examples. Of course, this happens in the tech versus non-tech, new economy versus old economy debates. But the example given frequently is Tesla. as the poster boy of this narrative world. Tesla's sales for recently were 1/8 of Toyota's, and profit was 1/10 of Toyota's. And yet the market value of Tesla has been earlier treble and now double of Toyota. One of the major reasons is the Tesla narrative has somehow entered the psyche of the target group. Whether it has entered it by phrases like changing the world, master disruptor, on the right of the environmental movement, or it is only because of the cult crazy figure of Elon Musk, a Trump-like political analog in the corporate world. But the point is, Tesla has succeeded way beyond its punching strength because of narrative, not numbers. That's the point I make. Apple is another example. Apple's profit is only about 8%, but its stock is up in the same period by more than 300%. I think this is a narrative success. Building such a narrative around trade is necessary. It is not about the truth of the figures, which are important, it's about meaning, and meaning impregnated with what people either already believe or want to believe. They want to believe liberal doses of nationalism, emotion, disruptive technology, potential to discover a magical drug, the immigration threat. That will all be varying contextually. But the point is, you have managed to convey a narrative which is beyond the numbers. And I think India needs to think of that, including our diplomatic skills at the mission levels, including some bombardment in terms of conveying the message. I'm not saying that I'm talking about hype without substance. I'm not talking about just creating a hullabaloo about it, but this has been found to be a very real non-number game in the corporate world, in the commercial world, the narrative example. The last and the ninth aspect is trade policy processes. I think trade policy processes links with the previous point of narrative. At every level, we need to improve our messaging. It is not just because the Prime Minister speaks that the messaging is to get across. It is not just when the Minister speaks. It has to be inbuilt into the system down to the lowest small component of the department, into our missions. And there has to be the synergy and a 360 degrees view when you do a small trade exhibition in a mission abroad. How it syncs with an FTA, how it syncs with your future trade policy for that country, how it syncs with friend assuring of a country. This kind of a 360 degree view is what I really think is trade policy information and processes, which is not happening and has not happened, in fact, because our system is more bureaucratic, obviously. The 360 degrees view is not so easily possible. And it includes things like capacity building through interactions with lower level stakeholders, not only policymakers, but stakeholders, to tell them that this 360 degrees view is important, with a trade association, with an exporter, with a leather chap, with a shoe chap, and so that he kind of gets integrated into the 360 degrees object. Well, friends, as I said, fools tread where angels fear to tread. I have come to the end of what I want to say. As I said, I'd like to be more a listener than a speaker. But I think that these are very interesting challenges, real challenges, sometimes insuperable, but also real interesting opportunities. And from all these issues, enhancing competitiveness by itself is a major issue. Technological upgradation is a major issue. Maintaining and yet improving the efficiency with the labor-intensive character of our textiles and clothing. Having dispersed and resilient participation in global value chains. All this, I think, is a very exciting and a very opportune moment to discuss such exciting issues. And I'm quite happy to listen for a while from all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singhvi. That was an excellent speech, and we'll surely benefit from all the points which you made, and get these points communicated to the powers that be in the government and outside the government as well.